Welcome. This is the second in a series of 3. The next one is on the 2nd of December on Judgment. And we actually have a new videographer, which is great. But you'll see me walking around with this big thing. So it's nothing serious. If you see me not walking straight, I'm not limping. So why bother? There was a lady the other day who talked about, ego and what's wrong with that, because mostly people like people with big egos. They go to lawyers with big egos, and they go to, we're attracted to people with big egos. But this is time to let the ego go, and we're going to talk about the other shade of ego today, which is desirous attachment, which is just another aspect of it. So we also talked about how, I'm going to just recap a bit for some of those that might not have been there. We talked a little bit about the search for the self as being primary in our consciousness, whether we know about it or not, or trying to do anything about it or not. And we also talked about the hedonism versus true meaning. That hedonism, just sort of saturating oneself in sensory pleasures, is only satisfactory temporarily. It doesn't last very long, as opposed to meaning, which is much more long-lasting. The other thing about it is that in trueness, in terms of the Buddhist idea, is that they say they're the true hedonists, because they're about true meaning, true joy, true happiness. So this is going to be a lot about happiness and joy as well. We're going to talk about some of those aspects. And the other thing that's really interesting is that usually when things start to make money and are financially productive, people start to pay attention. But also when they start to be healthful, we start to pay attention. Now, it's good that happens, but we should be doing it for its own sake. And neuroscience and ancient wisdom are coming into alignment now more and more. So whatever I'm talking about today, which has to do with forgiveness, compassion, gratitude, being in joy, bumps up your immune system. It lengthens your telomeres so that you actually live longer, you are healthier. They are healthful, as opposed to cynicism and lack of forgiveness, which actually depress your immune system and increase your pro-inflammatory factors, which create things like cancer, autoimmune diseases, and so on, and aging. So if for no other reason, it's useful to do these things now for health and happiness, even if one isn't interested in spiritual development, which is true for yoga today. So, yoga has become sort of a spiritual materialism in many aspects, but nevertheless it does a lot of good because people are happier, they're more in alignment, they have equanimity and so on. But we're talking beyond that now about some other aspects of it, and let's just go over what we're going to be talking about. Turn this thing on. And this is our plan for the day. Always I like to look at energy anatomy because it's now tying in with neuroscience and functional MRI studies. You can start to see some of these things being confirmed by neuroscience. The different guises of stuff, how we can counteract it with the mystical, the magical, awe and nature. KISS, which was kind of a common thing a way back. KISS, keep it simple, stupid. For those of you who don't remember. Narrow mind is about wants, and spacious mind is about needs. We'll talk a bit about that. Non-attachment is not the same as detachment, completely different. Renunciation is detachment. People sometimes do renunciation of all material things and sensory things. It comes back to bite you in the ass. The ancestors say that what you resist will persist. And we see that with some people that are on a spiritual path that renounce things. Renouncing is not what it's about. It's about enjoying all the sensory pleasures, but with, responsibly. We're going to talk about generosity, gratitude, and joy, and ultimately about the field, opening the heart, love, which gives us access not only to greater intuition, but also to a richer dream life. So it struck me when I was designing this talk that, if you look at the word God and you put L in there, L meaning lust, lust after stuff, it changes the whole equation. It's all a question of intention. So if you're looking for the mother lode and it's about your higher self, that's good. But if you're looking for the mother lode, whether it's black gold or proper gold, then you're on the wrong track. And gold has many guises as well. You know, we might think we're not after it, but at some level we are. Now, this I quoted last time by Rumi: give up owning things and being somebody. Quit existing. Well, last time we talked about being somebody, which is about persona, how we want to present ourselves to people. And today it's the other shade of ego, which is giving up things, owning things. Quit existing, a very pithy quote. And this is Jung, who said the meeting of oneself is at first the meeting of the shadow. Just to remind us that the shadow is the same as the evil inclination. In all of us there's an inclination to do good and there's an inclination to do evil. Unless we are aware of the shadow, we're going to be enveloped in the shadow. And more the shadow is sort of incorporating a lot of America today, because it's fear-based and you can appeal to people tremendously strongly on fear. But by the same token, the more you can come into recognition of the shadow, the more one can see the light. You know, Campbell said, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. So that treasure is your shadow, because the shadow will tell you where the light is coming from. Now, we also talked about the evil inclination versus the good inclination, which is the same as the shadow, dark forces versus spirit guides, tricksters versus your ancestors, monkey mind versus spacious mind, and ego and desirous attachment is part of ego, which is a separate thing entirely. And I just want to make that clear, because it is important in terms of spiritual practice. We need to subordinate the dark side to the light side in all of those. So this is Patanjali's sheaths, which many of you have seen before, and I like re-quoting it because it's very, it's very pithy. The food or the body sheath is on the outside. That's most of where we pay most of our attention. The energy sheath is really important for moving things inwards towards the center, where the Atman is, the self is. The energy sheath is enhanced with yoga, any kind of meditation, qigong. Africans say we pray by singing and dancing. That it's actually, I think it's better. You improve your energy sheath a little bit better with bodily meditations, active meditations. The mind sheath is the primitive mind. It's the monkey mind that's sitting on our shoulder, chattering conversations of delusion to us. It's fear-based. It's about emotions. It's about addictions, compulsions, habits, desires. It's in the primitive brain, and you can see this on a functional MRI. It's the default mode for most of us, unless we're advanced meditators. This is what the ancestors also call narrow mind. And this is about wants, not needs. The intellectual sheath of Patanjali is what the ancestors called spacious mind, which is Buddha mind. It's the big mind. And this is about feelings rather than emotions, how to control feelings, which you can only really control this sheath with meditation. The mind sheath and intellectual sheath, narrow mind and spacious mind, and ego, which is different, form a triad, which is always in flux, and it's subject to sensory input. So depending on the sensory input, and we overloaded with sensory, the hypnosis of sensory materialism, it'll overcome the intellectual sheath, and you'll be in the mind sheath much more. So the more we're in the mind sheath, the more we're going to be in the astral vibration, a lower fear, primitive survival kind of vibration. The more we're in the intellectual sheath or spacious mind, the more we are in a causal vibration. We would all hope to inherit the causal realm when we die. You know, the Buddhists call it the pure land, and the yogis call it the causal, and the Kabbalists call it the Garden of Eden. It's a land where you don't have to come back again. The way things are going, I'm not sure any of us really want to come back again. So the mind sheath going to connect us to the astral realm, which is where most of us go in our dream time. It's a much lower vibration. The astral realm is a realm that will give you an idea of what it's going to be like on the other side when we check out. Okay, so this is from the ancestors who say spacious mind embraces narrow mind. It doesn't try and get rid of it, using it to its truest purpose, as with a tamed ego. In other words, subordinating ego. Spacious mind does not deny, reject, or ignore their clamorings, for they serve an essential need. Spacious mind allows narrow mind and ego their rightful place, but does not let them reign. A little bit different to the yoga concept of samadhi, where it's almost talk about getting rid of ego. You actually can't get rid of it, but you can subordinate it. I think you can for moments, and if you're a guru, for prolonged moments, but for most of us it's quite hard to do. Just to show you where it's at, energetically, it's in the lower chakras, which is the survival chakras, what Maslow called our survival needs. Ego and desirous attachment are really synonymous, they're just shades of the same thing. Ego and desirous attachment are about self-mastery, self-esteem, self-concept, self-sufficiency, self-actualization, all very important. One has to have an ego to let go of it. One has to, the more powerful the ego, the more the challenge, but then you have more spiritual practice required for you. If you don't have an ego then, and you go into the upper chakras too quickly, you're going to be ungrounded. So that's really important. Love, opening the heart, is the gateway to the higher chakras. Remember that although this looks like a single thing, it's bounded by the sun and the moon nadis, the sun and the moon channels, masculine, feminine, expansion, contraction, blue, red, which are a polarity which create a triad very much similar to the tree of life. Up here is where we want to be, the crown chakra, the third eye, connection with the cosmos, our intuition, and things that are outside of ourselves. Our current environment, or what we know now, is what the Zohar calls the 1% world. There's a 99% world out there that we cannot access except if we get up here. And that's really part of this whole hierarchy of chakras, is moving beyond our survival needs to what Maslow would call our growth needs. So this is the ancestors again, and they say the sages speak of a garden where the plants are treated with tenderness and care for their own sake alone, such that the garden and the gardener unite. As Netzach flows while one weeds, waters, and prunes, nurturing and delighting in the garden itself, and not attachment to how the garden may be perceived by others. So if you're just doing a garden work and you're interested in the garden itself, you're doing spiritual work. If it's about being the best garden in Santa Barbara, there's a karmic implication for that. But if you see where this is on the tree of life, it's kind of interesting. Down here is ego, which they call also foundation, very important energy center. Here there's non-attachment, which is netzach. Its opposition is hod, which is attachment. And this is where we are looking, very much the same as the yoga thing. And this can be anything from information, especially fame, pride, persona, and power, and then of course sex, drugs, rock and roll, which is down here. Interesting, sex usually comes first. They don't say drugs, alcohol, rock and roll, and then sex. It's usually sex. Sex and power are sort of connected to each other. But when you move up here, you get to understanding, which has to do with knowledge and opinions, but then there's wisdom. So this is very similar to the sixth chakra, the third eye. It's about this is about, if you like, the Einstein archetype, getting in touch with the 99% world, not just the 1% world that we're living in. And understanding is important. We need both of these. We need the balance of the two. But the tree of life, instead of having a sun and a moon channel, has a left and a right side. This one contracts, this one expands. We need both of them. You can't have one or the other. So I want to contrast the Einstein archetype with a guy called Dawkins. Anybody read Dawkins' book about the God delusion? Dawkins is a bright guy, arrogant, and he's running around the world with a guy who's a physicist, and he's saying that anybody who is religious or believes in God is an idiot. Literally, he's saying that. So he is actually the idiot. because he is excluding the 99% world, because we can only prove the 1% world. And even then, the proof is changing all the time, you know. It's always in the moment. So he has knowledge, and he has opinions, and he has understanding, but he's the shadow side of understanding. Einstein, on the other side, is the light side of understanding. And the balance of the two is where we want to be. We need both of them, but we have to be careful of what we do with knowledge. The ancestors say, with all your strength, get knowledge, but they want you to have it for different reasons. And this is one of them. The value of information resides in its use for transformation. So at this stage of our lives, you know, we're all in, I think, we're either in the last half of our life or the last third, some of us. And this is when the yogi or yogini goes walk about in the forest to find his or her true destiny, or get enlightened, or do service, chop wood and carry water, so to speak. And this resides in information that will lead to transformation. The Native Americans have a saying, if you can't grow corn with it, what use is it? And that's, I think, a very, very valid saying. We need information and knowledge for our livelihood. We wouldn't be sitting in this audience if we didn't have knowledge and information. But now is the time really to use information and knowledge to transcend understanding into wisdom. Information, if accurate, is neutral. Its uses are its virtues. So we need to take information, make them virtuous. This is a sort of, I don't like to talk names here, name names, but it's kind of useful when you think of it. This is more the Dawkins situation. Those who exploit knowledge are lost to wisdom. Wisdom is born of humility and is nourished by compassion. It is grace in action. When knowledge is used only for self-gain and control, it is conceit in action. So, you know, it's not a punishment, it's a consequence. Karma is not about good or bad, it's about consequences. It's really like Newton's law, you know, the law of cause and effect. It doesn't matter, you can do whatever you want, free will rules, but there will be consequences. You know, a lot of people are living for today because they think today, you know, tomorrow I die, let's live for today. And the whole world seems to have lost its moral compass. But there is accountability at the end of the day, and they think they're ignoring that wisdom. Now, last time I gave this quote about emptying our boats, crossing the river of life, but I want to talk about it in another light now. You know, if you think of our boat as our body, and here we are going across the river of life, eventually to the other side, if we stuff our boat with too much stuff, we're going to slow down our progress. And if we have a lot of people with us who don't make us more than who we are, they're going to retard our progress. But we have to navigate skillfully between the banks of non-attachment and attachment. These are much more fun. You know, they look like they're fun. They're much more alluring. And like I say, they're temporarily satisfying. These look kind of boring. You know, you think, oh, meditation, it's not as interesting as some other stuff. But eventually, you know, what we do, this is a cybernetic negative feedback mechanism, much like the body's hormonal system works. It's not a straight line. It's quite okay to sort of go there and then come back a bit and say, hey, you know, let's go and take a look here. Don't like that. Let's go back in the middle. But the main thing is not to get stuck here, because then you're going to have a problem. At least a spiritual problem, maybe not a material problem. Power, pride, and persona, the three P's, fame and sex, information and knowledge, can all be considered as stuff. For instance, you might have a professor of English at Oxford University who has all these certificates on his wall, but he has no money. So his stuff is really in his knowledge, in his information. And he can walk around the campus proudly, being awfully full of himself, put down his students, tell them they're stupid. And that is, you know, stuff, but it's just the same sort of thing in a different form. Versus what's real, you know, mystery, the mystical, the magical, and miracles. You know, Einstein said there are two ways to live one's life. One way is that everything is a miracle, and the other way is that nothing is a miracle. And we'll try and show you how there are miracles around with a little bit of a meditation. Nature is one way of looking at this awe, this mystery. The sad thing is I've got 3 grandchildren, and it's really a battle to get any of them to come on a hike. They'd much rather play with their iPad. But when you take them on a hike, they love it, and they really get involved in it. And there's a guy now who's written a book called Last Child Left Behind in the Wilderness. Very sad situation. And now there's a syndrome called the nature deprivation syndrome. What's that about? It's about this kind of thing, iPhones, iPads, that social media, focusing here instead of what's really real. So this is the ancestors again who teach the need to understand the mystery is a prerequisite to believing we are captive to narrow mind. It's about the primitive mind. Surrender of spacious mind encompasses belief without understanding. Surrender is about trust, belief, hope, letting go. It's about connecting with the field of possibilities. It's about connecting with the 99% world. It's about being in the Tao, being in the flow, recognizing that the higher self is more important than ego, as opposed to understanding and information, which you can have on your iPhone. You can look up just about anything you want. This is Einstein again, who said the most beautiful and profound emotion we can experience is the sensation of the mystical. In this emotion you dwell in wonder and stand wrapped in awe. He also said this is the true sower of all science. And if you look at Maslow's peak experience, you'll see there are many causes for getting a peak experience. The peak experience is when the knower, the known, and the process of knowing all fuse into one. So with Einstein, the knower, him, the process of knowing or trying to understand the mind of God, which is what he wanted to do, sometimes I'm sure fused into one, and he had this awe-inspiring peak experience where you feel almost like a mini samadhi, where you become one with the experience. So that science is one way of getting that. But he's connecting with the mystery of it, not with the understanding of it. And you would not get to that point unless you were really in the wisdom side, in the third eye side. You couldn't have that kind of an experience. So this is really one of the ways of connecting with the peak experience. The other way is with sex, when childbirth, people have peak experiences. Nature is a powerful way. Dance, even looking at a piece of art, you can have that same kind of experience. But science is another way of doing it, but you don't do it through the understanding part on the tree, you do it through the wisdom part of the tree. The more we immerse ourselves into the mystery, the more intuitive we become. So this is also important. When we're up at the top of the chakra system, in the third eye, or in the wisdom of the tree of life, we become more intuitive, and we become much more connected with our dreams. And we are able to interpret dreams being scripted by our spirit guides to us, and our whole life starts to connect differently with the 99%. So there's more than just sort of some ancient wisdom that says we should do that. This is the other side of the healthfulness, is the intuitiveness, the other side of the immune system being bolstered, and so on. Anyway, the more intuitive we become, and the more aware of how the natural and the supernatural are interwoven. This is sort of, to me, the example of this is the Bushmen of the Kalahari, the last hunter-gatherers of the Kalahari, who balance the natural and the supernatural so effortlessly. Our task is not to try to decode the mystery, but to access it. We're not supposed to try and explain it. Even Einstein said, our knowledge is the knowledge of children. We will know a little more than we know now, but the real nature of things we will never know, never. Each time we open one door, it's like the deeper you go, the less you know. We just open another box into another mystery and another mystery. And to try and believe we know what's going on is crazy. And this is where this quote came from. It's from an anonymous guy, but I love it. Anyone who isn't confused here really doesn't understand what's going on. And the quantum physicists say the same thing. Anybody who really thinks they understand quantum physics doesn't understand it at all. It's all a mystery. It's a paradox. And this is why indigenous wisdom is so profound, because they're okay with paradox. We want things to be black and white, right or wrong. indigenous wisdom is both things can be right. There can be more than one story, and depends on the moment as to which story is the right story. And that's much more in line with quantum physics, which is kind of where shamanic wisdom resides. So I wanted to say a few words about Inward Bound, because that's how I started this journey. I took myself off to the Kalahari in 1987. I was going through sort of an existential crisis, and I spent a month with the Bushmen, mostly on my own. A few days I was there in the beginning with a group, and then I stayed with them, and I walked with them, and I foraged with them, and I watched them hunt. And especially the best times were at night, with the dancing and the singing around the fire. And what I recognized from them was that they had nothing, but they were very, very happy. It almost felt like I dropped into a Buddhist Sangha. They were non-judgmental, they had an unconditional positive regard for each other, unconditional love for their kids. They were more of a matriarchal society. There was no leader. They were egalitarian. And I came back with this idea of making a little group called Inward Bound. I would take people into wild places to try and mimic the Bushman consciousness, and which meant having as little between us and the wilderness as possible, and going to the most pristine wilderness that was possible. And it worked, but of course it was labor intensive, it took time, it took quite a lot of money. And I wrote a book about using nature as spiritual practice. And what this is said much better by the ancestors, who say, keep to the source of living waters. This is the Bushman consciousness. What do we really need? We need clean air, we need clean water, we need decent food, we need a shelter, a roof over our heads, all things the Bushmen were quite happy with. And now they've been kicked out of their Garden of Eden by knowledge, which is what we brought to them. They're knowing now how little they have, when in fact they had everything they wanted. And of course fire, which today is energy, to run our computer, our car, our iPhone and so on. We can see how important energy is when you look at Puerto Rico. The whole island completely paralyzed without energy. So that was like the fire to the Bushmen. Without fire, they were sort of at the mercy of wild animals. They couldn't cook their food. They couldn't make a lot of the implements. So energy has always been primary. But the important thing, the other source of living waters, is love, connection, meaning, which are what we're talking about today. And the ancestors go on to say, do not think to store in cisterns, they will break and crumble, and the water will be lost. In the second half, we're going to talk about impermanence. Cup your hands and drink deeply and often, and you will have health and joy. Be in the moment, enjoy the basic needs and necessities of life, and that's really all we need. And if we're going to pray for something, pray for, if something we lack, pray for what you need, not for what you want. This is Hillel, who said, more possessions, more worry, more things to maintain, more things to sustain, more generosity, more peace. It's true, the more you give away stuff, the better you feel. There's nothing wrong with possessions, only to being possessed by them. And the problem with possessions is they require some kind of maintenance. So unless you've got a lot of money and you can delegate, managers to maintain your stuff, you're going to be preoccupied with maintaining your stuff. And I can just say that from my own experience, I went from a big house into a small house after my divorce, and I felt better. And then I moved from the small house into my studio and my back garden, and I felt better. I gave most of my stuff to my kids, and I bought IKEA furniture, and I felt better. I do a spring cleaning every few years, and I look at things, and if I haven't found something that I've thought of or used or really needed, I either throw it away or I give it away, and I feel better. So trust me, you'll feel better the more you get rid of stuff. If you don't, call me, I'll take you out to dinner. It's just a fact of life. If you can be a bushman, you'll be happy knowing that that we've got everything we need most of the time, and that's just fine. To make room for the divine, we must empty our life of obsessions with self-centeredness of narrow mind, whose clutter obstructs the venturing of spacious mind and restricts its expanse. So stuff also clutters us up, clutters our spacious mind. The ancestors say God cannot be realized if there's a slightest trace of pride. Pretty heavy statement. The slightest trace of pride. Ego is going to shut the door for you. But stuff is also going to shut the door. It doesn't work. Do not be trapped by materialism. Release yourself from what you are or are not accountable for. Well, the big thing that most of us are accountable for is debt, you know. The American way is to be in debt because now we have all kinds of incentives. The more debt you're in, the more tax deduction you get, and basically we put ourselves in prison because at the end of the day, we still got to pay the taxes. We might pay a little less, but we're still going to pay them. Remember the old song some of you might know from way back, you load 16 tons and what do you get? Another day old and deep in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, because I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. It's the same, you know, as the old days with the prospectors in the store. It hasn't changed. It's just a much more sophisticated level with all these tax deductions and so on. So what happened with me is when my healing center in South Africa was claimed illegally, and I decided to let it go, I miraculously got paid out because about a week after I was paid out, I didn't get what I should have been worth, but I got something. About a week after I was paid out, the land claims court went bankrupt. So I came home pleased that I'd gotten paid out because my ancestors said, be prepared to walk away with nothing. And I had money, and the first message I got was, pay off your mortgage. And I thought, that's insane. I'm going to have 25-30% tax. I went to my accountant and I said, I want to pay off my mortgage. And he said the same thing. You've got to be out of your mind, you know. I paid it off and I felt better, you know. And the ancestors were right. The minute you get rid of debt and you own everything that you have, you feel better. I remember before coming to the United States, there was a movie I was watching and it said the typical American family. 3-car garage, 3 cars, beautiful home, pool, TV set, washing machine, all the mod cons. And this was in the 1970s. And they said, this is what that person owns. And they take away 90% of everything in the house. And I was appalled because that wasn't true for South Africa in those days. Most of the things you did own. So what you're accountable for, I think, try as best we can to get rid of debt. Clearly there are things we need that we're going to have to pay off. But if you can own them, it's better. And if you can make it simple, they're less expensive. But also what we're not accountable for. We're not accountable for the energy vampires that are around us. We're not accountable for people who demand things from us that's not our job. The ancestors say anything or anybody that doesn't make you more of who you are makes you less of who you are. So release from what we're not accountable for as well. All right, so this is a Bushman prayer, and we're going to talk about a little bit about impermanence now. The day we die, the wind comes down to take away our footprints. The wind makes dust to cover up the marks we left while walking, for otherwise the thing would seem as if we were still living. Therefore the wind is he who comes to blow away our footprints. If you look at the Bushman's existence, they had nothing, you know. The Bushman basically slept around the fire, hardly had even a place to sleep except when it rained, really. And the hunting pack consisted of a digging stick and a fire stick and a sipping straw to suck water out of trees or from sipping wells in the ground, and also a bow and arrow with poison arrows, little kind of almost like a toy bow. They would rely on their incredible tracking and hunting ability to get right close to the animal and then run it down till it dropped. So in essence, tracks were essential to the Bushman way of life. Without the ability to read tracks, they could never have survived as hunter-gatherers. So they could always tell a story from the tracks, so that in a sense that was their written language. So this is sort of pertinent because they looked at their tracks and what they left in the sand as what they left behind, which is a lot more than what most of us are going to leave behind. So in reality, whatever we leave behind will be forgotten. Our children might remember it, our grandchildren won't. You can be sure that our great-grandchildren won't. And all the things on the buildings that you read about, nobody even knows who the people were anymore. So this is sort of the introduction to the part about impermanence and desirous attachment, and death. The Buddhists say that of all the meditations, the meditation on death can be the most profound of all, because we can't take it with us. I remember a Buddhist teacher of mine, and I studied Buddhism for a while, saying the way to practice death is to imagine somebody living in your house, living with your significant other, walking in your clothes, driving your car, hanging out with your kids, and everybody's happier than they were with you. And then think of your work, that whoever's taken over your job is actually much better at it than you are, and everybody's very happy. It's a very good practice in non-attachment. Because if we are attached, one of the dangers of attachment is getting earthbound. If you attach to stuff, what's going to happen when you pass on is that you're going to be attached to loved ones, you're going to be attached to old skeletons in the closet that you haven't resolved. You might be attached to your work, you might be a control freak and think nobody can manage your garden, and you'll maybe attached to your garden. And what happens, you don't hear the voices of the ancestors calling you home, and you don't see the light, and you don't go over to the other side to reconcile with your karma and complete your soul's path or continue on your soul's path. So that's a problem, because a lot of these earthbound spirits, there are millions of them on the earth planet. Some of them don't even know they're dead. They just wonder why people aren't talking to them and not relating to them. They're sort of wandering around the earth plane. So one of the jobs, and it can be quite tricky, you need to get some shamanic help is to guide the person back to the light so that they're not lost between the worlds. I remember once having a dream some years back where a bunch of us were going in a boat across to the other side, sort of a proverbial river of Styx, if you like. We were going across to the other side of the veil. And some guy arrived late to the party. And he arrived on the bank, and he was naked, and he had his flip-flops on. And remember, we come in alone, we go in alone, we come in naked, we go out naked. Anything that we come in one door and we go out another door, but you can't go back through the other way with stuff with you. It's not going to work. This guy was there with his flip-flops, and clearly he was late because he had been running with his flip-flops and he couldn't make it to the boat. We were shouting to him to jump in and swim. We would pull him into the boat. And you could see him look at his flip-flops, and then he decided he would jump in. But now he was swimming just with his arms and not his legs, so he was slowed down. He lost one flip-flop, but he was still swimming with one leg up with the other flip-flop, like it's the only thing he had left. And of course, a big whirlpool came and sucked him down into the earth plane. So it's a scary thing, but remember, it's not only stuff being bad for us now, it's good practice for death to start releasing from things. This is an interesting one that said, one day the people came to the master and asked, "How can you be so happy in a world of such impermanence, where you cannot protect your loved ones from harm, illness, and death?" The master held up a glass and said, "Someone gave me this glass and I really like it. It holds my water admirably and glistens in the sunlight. One day the wind may blow it off the shelf, or my elbow may knock it off the table. I know this glass is already broken, so I enjoy it incredibly." I think that's the other thing. I sort of think of this in terms of our bodies. Remember that if we're crossing the river of life in our boat, we don't want to, and the boat is also representative of our body, we don't want a leaky boat where, because of health problems, we're so busy filling the leaks for our health that we can't really get to the other side in the way we would like to get to the other side. So I kind of think about the body as being a treasure that we have to help us cross over. And I think more than anything, yoga sort of speaks to this. There are 8 limbs to yoga, and one of the limbs is breath work, and another one is postures, all about being in the body, which is very much an African thing as well. And recently I had a dream which said, the words to the song were, oh, this life only I borrow. This body is given on loan. Everything we have is given on loan. So we're going to have to let it go eventually. Emperor Wu asked, I've built temples and ordained monastics. What merit is there in this? Bodhidharma replied, no merit. We talked last time at all, that the ancestors say ulterior motives are grossly underrated. They're grossly underrated. It's much better to do something than to not do it. Much better to ordain and to build than not to do it at all. But if you're doing it for its own sake, it has no karmic implication. And if you've got stuff for its own sake, there's no karmic implication. But if there's an agenda behind it, it's going to slow us down. You cannot control results, only your actions. You cannot decide outcomes, only your choices. So it is best that you practice non-attachment to any concern related to outcome. Now, this is very profound. And by the way, for some of you, have come up to me, there's a new book out. It's about the Healing Center. And I want to just talk about it for a little bit. There's a book signing on the 22nd of February. If you want to come to that at Chaucer's, you can get it on Amazon. We're not allowed to sell them here, but there are some cards there. And hopefully it'll be online, at least a blurb about it. So this is, I'm alluding to what happened to me at the Healing Center, which was called Chisimani. After my initiation in Swaziland in about 2002, I had this epic dream of this land. And it was absolutely vivid. I knew exactly what it looked like, and I spent a year or so looking for it, and eventually I found it. And then I had other dreams that confirmed to me that I was in the right place. So I thought, great. So I bought the place, and no sooner had I bought it and started to build on it than a land claim was lodged against it. It was an illegal land claim, and it was actually submitted even after the date when land claims were permitted. So there was tremendous corruption, and land claims were being lodged left, right, and center. So I thought, well, it's a frivolous land claim. It's never going to work. The ancestors sent me here. They sent me the dream. I will prevail. I'll win the land claim, and I didn't worry about it. Then as the years progressed, it became quite clear that I was not going to win the land claim, that there was no way in hell the land claims court was going to uphold a claim against a white feudal landlord on top of a mountain when there's some impoverished black people in the village that are trying to claim it, even though it doesn't belong to them. So on the advice of a lot of the neighborhood farmers and some good lawyers, they said, just give it up, Dave, walk away. And the ancestors, walk away, even be happy if you get paid. So I had a lot of dreams that warned me, pretty much scary dreams, like my aunt came to me and said, are you prepared to die for this place? And similar like dreams. So I decided to give it up. I submitted to the land claim. I cooperated with them, and I walked away, and I actually got paid. So this is one of the sayings that's actually in the book, because they highlight the lessons I learned along the way that had been given to me by the ancestors, because I didn't quite understand them until I experienced them. One of the sayings is also, it's better to experience the learning than learn the experience. So I was experiencing the learning at Chisimani. So I couldn't control results, only my actions. In spite of everything, despite that, I came there in the Mandela era, there was incredible positive energy in the Rainbow Nation. I was looking forward to spending more time in South Africa. All my plans were good. I thought, well, they would welcome a Sangoma living on top of the mountain. No, they didn't. They wanted my land. They bewitched us. There was sorcery, there was witchcraft all around. But I walked away, and I was non-attached. This was my Tibetan painting in a way. The Tibetans do these sand paintings where they make this elaborate thing and then they throw it away at the end of a few months to recognize the importance of impermanence. So that was my lesson in non-attachment, and I walked away. Luckily, I got paid. And thank goodness, because in retrospect, if I would have persisted and stayed and maybe even won the claim, which was unlikely, I would be stuck there with Zuma, who's the shadow side of the leadership par excellence. He's a lot cleverer than Mugabe in Zimbabwe. He's just been overtaken. he's messed up the whole country, very much unlike Mandela. So non-attachment is a good thing because we don't know the whole picture. The ancestors do because they're not localized in space and time. I love this thing. When I first read it, it sounded a bit quirky, kind of New Age, by Harrison Owens. Whoever are present are the right people. So whoever was present when I built the healing center were the right people. Half of them were dishonest and screwed me big time. But without them, I would never have built it. It would never have come to being because it was very difficult to build a place on the top of a mountain with a 4x4 road. All you could take up there was a pickup. You couldn't even bring a truck up there. Whoever were present were the right people. Whenever it began was the right time to begin, which was true. It began in 2002. It was the right time. Whatever happens is the only thing that could have happened, and that's exactly what happened. I walked away, and when it's over, it's over. So I learned a lot. I learned a lot about medicinal plants. I learned a lot about witchcraft and sorcery because we were continuously fighting it off. And these statements, although simple, are very profound. So they're good. I recommend them highly when you are, you're not getting what you want. This you know very well, but it makes more sense now. Lord, grant me the strength to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Now, what about detachment? Concerning detachment, one of its paths lead to a lifeless world without enthusiasm or hope, a place of indifference where one could become ensnared in hidden traps of dejection and despair, where one no longer cares to love nor dares to trust. Detachment is really resignation. Remember, surrender is giving in. Resignation is giving up. Detachment is giving up. Detachment is sort of hopelessness. It's not trusting. It's not having faith. It's not being in the field. A friend of mine once said to me, ever since I gave up hope, I feel much better. Which is actually true because there's a certain comfort in giving up hope. There's a certain comfort in detachment, in resignation. Because, you sort of, it's the couch potato syndrome. You say, well, there's nothing I can do about this. I'll sit on the couch, watch TV, drink beer, and get fat. There is a certain comfort in that, but it's not good spiritual practice. So renunciation, which I sort of alluded to, is not what we're talking about. We're here to enjoy everything, and we will be accountable for enjoying all of our senses to the full, but enjoying them with a spiritual reference. God is attached, by the way, for those who don't know, all these quotes that are not in italics are from the ancestors. God is attached to his creation. He's a God of passion. He is a God of joy. He is a God of serenity. I remember asking this Buddhist teacher, if your whole goal is about enlightenment, aren't you neutralizing the fact that you have an agenda, that everything's supposed to be without for its own sake? And he said pretty much the same thing. If it's about spiritual practice, if it's about connection with the self, the higher self, that's just fine. If it's about a higher purpose, if it's about spacious mind, that's okay. If it's about narrow mind, it's not okay. Wants, needs, and necessities have different characteristics. It is the want that is our enemy, not the need and necessity. So again, wants are narrow mind, and needs are spacious mind. Keep it simple, stupid. Just look at things in a different light, and is this really necessary? One of my favorite surgical teachers used to say before doing a surgery, he would question the resident and say, is this journey really necessary? Maybe that's a good mantra to have. Is this journey really necessary? This is Churchill. By the way, talking about forgetting, I don't think my grandkids won't even know who Churchill was. Churchill probably saved us from being run over by Hitler. But nobody remembers him in the new generations. But he said something profound. We make a living by what we get. And we need to make a living. We need to fulfill our needs. We need to pay the rent. We make a life by what we give. That's karma yoga. It's essentially doing service, trying to help the planet, any one of the beings, whichever being you prefer. The still beings, the rocks, the stones, the growing beings, the trees, the plants, the wild beings, or the animals, or the talking beings. Now there's this great movie called Paying It Forward. Anybody see it? Terrific movie, and it's easy to pay forward when something good comes your way, you know. You feel good, you feel generous. I would say pay it anyway, you know, if you want really, really good karma. Paying it forward actually has an agenda to it. It's quite a good one. It's like, well, I got something, so I'll give something back. The Bushmen have a thing of gift exchange called Exaro, which is very profound, because if somebody gives you something, you never forget. For instance, somebody might save your life, give you food and water when you were in really bad straits, or not. It doesn't have to be that grand, but you never forget. And the point of the gift exchange is that the size of the gift doesn't have to be the same as what was given to you. And there's no time reference. They're sort of kind of timeless, the Bushmen. So it could be 5 years down the road. It would probably be appropriate. It would be something that you really needed. It might be a walking stick or a hat or a skin for a new hunting bag or something like that. The Quechua people in Peru have another thing called Aini, today for me, tomorrow for you, which is much more like what we do. You know, I owe you, you owe me. There's this idea of a trade. You know, everything is done on trade. There's a kind of you know, you keep a list of things, and if your things don't match what you get back, then you kind of move away. That's more like our modern paradigm. Now, Hebrew is an interesting language because one word has a root and that it leads to many other things. A tzaddik is an enlightened being, an enlightened person, a self-realized being. But it comes from the root word, which is tzedakah, which is charity. And charity can be in many, many forms. It doesn't have to be giving alms to the poor. It can be the Mother Teresa archetype. You know, it can be serving the planet or any of the different beings. It can be visiting the sick. It can be helping a little old lady across the street. There are many, many guises of this type of giving. It's basically karma yoga, service yoga, doing things to make a difference. Now, a few words on gratitude. Be grateful and you will be happy. Happiness leads to great empowerment. Attend to your well-being, especially to happiness, the cause of which is sometimes found in hidden recesses, always in gratitude. Now, there's a psychologist, his name is Evans, I think he's up in Davis, California, who did a research project on gratitude. He got a bunch of students, somebody's nodding, and he gave them gratitude journals to keep, and they had a gratitude practice. And he found that when they practiced gratitude, they became happy, but there were many more other byproducts to it. There was joy, there was equanimity. It was a form of spiritual practice, which was actually very profound. And I remember I used to say, gratitude is the ultimate form of spiritual practice, until somebody corrected me and said, gratitude is the only form of spiritual practice. Which is probably true. So if you have an ancestral altar, or if you like to pray, if you like to ask things from the Great Spirit or from your guides, always have gratitude in mind, and always try and get out of the way of not being about yourself. If you need something, make it be about, if I have this, maybe it'll help me help others a bit more. We have to find more and more the gratitude in hidden recesses these days, because we are bombarded. Somebody asked me at the break, how do we deal with tricksters? Well, there are more and more tricksters than ever, and we will talk about those next year. By the way, there are some talks, flyers for next year's talks. Now, this is the ancestors again who said, give without remembering. Because if you're remembering and you're keeping an account, a reckoning, that's got a karmic implication. Take without forgetting. Be like the Bushman. Don't take anything for granted. I don't think that, as long as there's a token of gratitude, that's fine. Give freely, receive openly. You know, if somebody gives something, accept it graciously and say thank you. If somebody gives you a compliment, instead of saying, I used to say, oh, well, it's not really true. Accept the compliment and say thank you. because when you don't, it sort of closes the door and the other person feels bad, you know. So that's also a form of gratitude. Do all with gratitude. It is the way of love. It is the way of joy. These are simple concepts, you know. They're not very profound. They're not like the bank of attachment. They're like the bank of non-attachment. They don't sound that exciting, but they are profound in their own way. Now, just a few other things about coattails. You know, that you will have people that will try to ride on your coattails. In a sense, it's they see something that you have and they envy it, and then they want it, or they want to emulate it. These are the ancestors call the barnacles that attach to your boat that are crossing the river of life, slowing you down. Or friends that you don't make you more of who you are, who jump in your boat. So be careful of people who jump onto your bandwagon and slow you down. In other words, being subject to somebody else's desirous attachment. Remember, there's a commandment, do not covet, which means do not be envious, because covetousness has an implication of the evil eye. It's actually the basis of witchcraft. Witchcraft essentially arises from a jealous heart. So regarding expertise, the ancestors say, and connections, it is not maliciousness so much as jealousy, arrogance, and selfishness that you need to beware. So this is about the energy vampires. Some of us that are in the healing profession, you know, they're people who drain your energy more than others, but that's your job, you know. We need to just do it anyway because we're getting paid for it. It's our livelihood. But if you're not getting paid for it, you know, life's too short, like they say, to drink bad wine. Life's too short to hang out with the wrong kind of people, just for the sake of being around people. So what is the byproduct of all this? Well, accessing the field is quite simple. Firstly, you've got to open your heart. The heart chakra is the gateway to opening up to the field. Secondly, thirdly, and fourthly is spiritual practice, spiritual practice, spiritual practice. Subordinating ego to the higher self. Subordinating your evil inclination to your good inclination. Subordinating narrow mind to spacious mind. Subordinating the tricksters to your spirit guides. And all of this will give access to the field. Rumi said, out there beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field. I'll meet you there. This is the 99% world the Zohar talks about, which we can access a little bit, but these are the rules for getting in there. And it's a byproduct of all this kind of stuff, like we were saying. Pride and all those other things get in the way of accessing the field. It's just a consequence. It's not a moral judgment. This is a Hasidic saying that says, everyone should carefully observe which way his heart draws her, and then choose that way with all her strength, hope, will, and joy. The heart chakra, or the energy center, which is the center of the tree of life, called Tiferet, which is love and compassion, are the gateway. It's said that when you reach that the Tiferet's energy center, the student can teach him or herself. This is from the ancestors who say, if you declare your heart, whatever it is, and follow its course, however inexplicable it may seem, all that you truly want will fall into flow. This may not necessarily be as you would arrange it or even like it to be, but look for it to manifest, for it surely will. So I've given you the example of Chisimani, you know, my healing center. I always wanted to have a place in the book, in the bush, in the bush, and it had always been a dream of mine. And then I realized the dream. I had the passion, I had the desire, I had the dream, and I found the place. And when it all panned out, it was not what I expected it to be. I expected it, you know, that Mandela's legacy would prevail, that I would be, I would be in South Africa a lot more of the time, that my kids would want to come there and hang out. They didn't hardly want to come at all. Nothing happened the way I planned it to be, but it happened because I really, really wanted it. So if you're looking at the power of manifesting things, they're quite simple but difficult. Firstly, it's about passion, it's about will, it's about intention. The spirit world, the field, responds to very strong intention. Secondly, it's about putting that intention out into the field in a meditative state. It's going to be much more powerful in a meditative state. When you intend, you have to imagine what you want. For instance, I imagined a place in the bush. If I would have asked for a place in South Africa, I might have ended up in downtown Johannesburg. They said, well, he wants a place in South Africa, here it is, you know. So imagine very clearly what you want. It may not be exactly what you imagine, but it'll be quite close. You know, the more the more detailed, of course, the more difficult it is for them to comply, but they will comply as best they can. So put your imagination and the detailed imagination and your strong intention into the field with a sensory kind of meditation, because senses enhance the will, the courage. It's like when you watch that Google movie, you know, you can relate to awe and wonder. You know, it's a sensory thing. There's visual and there's auditory. There's music, it's going on. So sensory meditation is going to be powerful. The next step is release completely from any attachment to outcome. If you attach to the outcome, you actually push it away. You know, it's just a fact of the way things work. And then let the universe handle the details, which speaks to this. It's not going to be like you wanted it to be. And if you listen to Harrison Owens, it doesn't matter. You walk away and you come away, in my case, with a lot of knowledge. It was my postgraduate course in Sangoma, in shamanic medicine. I gained a lot and I walked away, and it was an amazing experience, but it wasn't what I planned. I thought I would still be there today, and I'm not there today, but it's all good. So it's all about, in summary, it's about awe rather than stuff. It's about surrendering and trusting to something bigger than ourselves. It's about keeping it simple. It's about gratitude. Giving gives joy. You know, the Mother Teresa archetype works, you know. And love is the gateway to the field, and all of these things will give us greater access to our dream time and to our intuition, which is very, very useful.